1999 interview with Elizabeth Cooley Chappell, widow of Dr. T. Oscar Chappell, who was the son of Peter Addison Chappell, who was a famous lawyer on Greenwood during the Greenwood period where Greenwood flourished. Mr. Chappell had a law office downtown and on Greenwood. And after the riot, which destroyed the law offices on Greenwood, he and B.C. Franklin and I.S. Spear set up a law office in a tent, and they took care of the claims of riot victims. Mrs. Chappell is going to tell us something about her famous father-in-law and what you know about his law office and what he did for the people of Tulsa and what happened to his property during this riot. So Mrs. Chappell.
I think his property was destroyed. He was always trying to help people, and he lived in Sepulveda, but his practice was in Tulsa, and he did a lot to help the people in Tulsa with their legal matters.
And so his law office was totally destroyed, wasn't it?
As far as I can, I think so.
Did your husband ever talk about what it was like? Now you said he lived in Sepulveda, so he missed, he didn't have to flee from the riot and all of that. But did he ever talk about his father and that tent office and those claims of his father?
Oh yes, he talked about his father and how his father and Lawyer Hall worked together, and I think another lawyer named Spears, I'm not sure. They had a law office.
And they filed those claims
for the citizens.
Yes. Do you know if any citizen, has anybody ever told you why their claims were rejected? As far as our research, we have found that no claim was ever paid. So did your husband ever talk about that?
Not really.
Did your father-in-law have any other property in North Tulsa that you know of?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure because I did not know my father-in-law. He was deceased when I married my husband.
Well, as the heir and the widow and heir of your husband, do you have any memorabilia of that period? Did he leave any newspapers or any of his father's? He inherited his father's papers.
Well, his sister and mother had them. And
now they have passed on, haven't
they? They're both gone.
So do you have access to those things now?
Actually, no, I don't have too many of them.
Oh. Well, I thank you for telling me what you know about that wonderful man. You did marry into a famous, prominent family,
Right.
And your husband carried on the tradition, the Chappell Goodwin Gallery, which
Right.
bears his name. Well, I do remember that your husband carried on this civil rights activism, and I have interviewed you before about that. And one thing that the young people didn't know was that Martin Luther King Jr. came to Tulsa. Some said he didn't come here, he was too busy to come here.
No.
But he definitely did come here because you told me. Would you tell us about that?
Well, my husband and Martin Luther King Jr. worked together in the National Congress for Christian Education. And they had traveled together across the country, and he did come for my husband here to Washington, and then they worked together all around the country as National Congress workers and officers.
So your husband did carry on that trait of his father, always helping people who needed help.
He was a very generous person, and his life was built on service to people. Didn't matter where they were, who they were, there was no such things as people that he wouldn't help. He did that as long as I knew him, and was doing it when he passed on.
Well, the Riot Commission thanks you for sharing this with us, and we are in the process of looking up records and finding out where the offices and businesses were, where the homes were, what property was lost. And we will keep that in mind and when we check and find out about the property of your father-in-law, Peter Addison Chappelle,
Right.
Who lost his law office in the riot. And also he might have lost his car. We're finding a lot of people who had parked or a lot of ambulances. One person told the story of had just bought a new ambulance. And that was what concerned him the most during the riot, trying to save that brand new ambulance, which he did not succeed at doing because it got shot full of holes during the riot. But we will check. Maybe your father-in-law maybe he lost his automobile.
Well, he was very instrumental in helping people get their legal work together and do the things that they needed done at the time, and he was generous in his service.
That's what most Tulsans that I've interviewed, that's what they remember about Mr. Chappelle, that after the riot he was not so concerned with personal losses, but with helping these people get justice, and he filed those claims. So we thank you for sharing this with us today.
Well, I wish I could have shared more with you. Had I known more, I'd been happy to.
But
we're glad that you remembered you involved my husband's father and my husband in this, and we're grateful that you did.
Well, it helped a lot because you're telling us firsthand information about a family that we can only read about, and yet you married into the family. So thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. You called me off guard. I hope I did what you did.
14th, 1999 interview with Annie Beard, Annie Birdie Beard, who is 85. And Mrs. Beard, you lived on south on Greenwood. Tell us where you lived and what your mother and dad did. And
my mother did nothing but keep, 10 miles.
well, tell about where you lived.
We lived right at the third house off of Eastern on Greenwood.
And you described the house. You said it had 4 rooms, a living room, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and that your dad was a cook.
He was a porter, I guess, at the Tulsa Hotel.
Oh, was a porter at the Hotel Tulsa. And your mother was a housewife, looked after you children. And you said that you had been on vacation in Tallahassee and had just returned to Tulsa June 1st.
My mother had all the children down to Tallahassee. To our grandmother. We'd been there a week. We went every year, all the time, And we just got here, and the Katy train got to Tulsa about noon. And we just coming home, and of course, glad to get home. We was running on that plane. And the route started, I guess, about 1 or 2 o'clock that day, and my daddy was at work. My mother ran to the door and told us to come home, and we went across the street home. And my daddy got home, I guess, about that evening, because after that car came down and went back up to the main part of Greenwood, because that church is still on the corner down there.
Mount Zion?
No, Methodist.
Oh, Vernon.
Yeah.
Vernon A&E.
And my daddy came from that evening, and we was all home, and they still had started, to fight and nothing. And so, I guess about dark or something, 7 or 8 o'clock, my uncle lived in the South End. He was in Bash, and he came through, and just a lot of them, gang up, like walking, coming from the South End, and he tried to get my daddy to get up and go with him, walk with him, because it's just a speak with him. Mr. Thomas, them lives next door, and they left with us, and we didn't leave until the next morning. We cried and begged my daddy, and he said he wasn't going to leave because he had to work too hard for, that stuff, and he wasn't going to walk on leave, but we cried and begged, and because we left the next morning. And the bullets was, let me see, I had a sister older than me, And I had two brothers. One was a baby and one was pretty good size. And we went walking, you know where the streetcar goes. Go out in Greenwood, and it went down. Cherry's house was sitting over on the over on the hill, but the streetcar track went down. Anyway, we walked on down there. We come out here in the addition. And the addition at that time wasn't built up like it is now. This was the addition. It was built up like it is now because it was like you building a mohawk, you know how the house gathered right. So we came out here, and that evening, on our way out there walking that boy, we didn't know where we was going. Just a gang of people, it just wasn't us. And we walked out here, and we was started bullets. We could hear bullets. My daddy would grab one of us, you know, and drink us this way, that way up. And we came out here and up at these houses out here because they hadn't got this far. And they brought the soldiers in from Fort Sill and Muskogee, right? And they were laying down on their stomach in these different places out here, you know, and they was trucks was picking us up, carrying us to the airport for safety.
But didn't you hide, and tell me about hiding in the coal pits. What about you?
Well, that was, we came out here, and when we seen the soldiers, we thought we didn't hide because it wasn't hide. You ever been out here at Jinx where the coal pits were? It's just big holes, you know, where they dug out, you know, all of this is filled in.
And you all hid in those?
Well, you couldn't hide because all the people, and a ditch, all anybody had to do is shoot down on your head.
But you still felt a little safer getting down
well, yeah, the grown people still, we fought out mom.
Oh, yeah.
So everybody was scared, you know, and people shooting going on. And as we saw those soldiers, we didn't know what those soldiers was to protect us or kill us. And so anyway, they had to land us out of the coal pits out there with ropes.
Oh. So you went down and then had to get out with ropes?
Yeah, it was a big place, and you know, you either had to find a place. You never lived in the country, I couldn't tell you the way. But you know, you had to find a place where you could step, you know, up a hill, and they had to land us out because I don't know what they dug about with. It was just, all of this was just dug out, and it might not have been no deeper than a tree. But it was dug out, it was what's called coal pit.
Oh. And tell me again about the car that warned you. Were those black people, you said that was a car came in, just loaded down?
Those was colored men.
Colored men, and they were warning you all that there was danger and...
No. It started down on Greenwood somewhere at the hotel.
Okay.
See, and there was some colored men down there and they had forward, and they grabbed the gun and everybody get the gun, you know, and get on there.
Were they just hanging onto that car?
They was inside the car and had the gun stuck out.
Okay.
And that old car was so low it was scooting, you know.
Oh, yeah. And so that was at the beginning of the riot.
And
you were playing jacks at that time. That's
across
what
the street.
You were playing jacks.
Yeah.
I've heard from a lot of the children, they didn't understand the seriousness of it, and they didn't want to come in from their playing, and the fathers and mothers knew this was dangerous. And
well, my mother got us in the house.
Oh, she said get in.
But we didn't know, I don't think she knew anything about a route, because I don't know, you know.
But she just wanted you all in the house.
Well, yeah, because the men had the guns and going up and down the street. But you know, I never, after that car went through, I don't remember. Now another car come through the next day when we was leaving from down there. While we could hear guns and they was shooting on the bullets would pass them, and they started burning up. And we got over the hill, you could see them burning up, you know, the place and burning up.
You could actually see the
fire
burning.
there.
Yes. And that must have been really scary, having bullets dropping around.
Well, we was crying, you know, our kids.
Yes.
And they had trucks and things and cars and carried us out to the fairground.
Okay.
And the Red Cross and things. I don't know how they did it, but you know, they get carts and things, give us all the carts, and they had food on them wagons, you know.
And you felt safe when you saw the Red Cross and all?
Yeah, we were safe. They had it guarded around.
Good,
They had it. It was just like the open field, you know. They had guards around, but it was like a shed, and we slept under it. We all had cots. They gave us all the cots to sleep on. I guess little children, I made 2 of them could sleep on. And my daddy worked for somebody over there by the Catholic Church on 10th Street. And after we was there about 2 days or 3, they got kind of quiet. I don't remember how many, but it wasn't long. Well, the white people, I guess somehow they called, you know, come and ask for people that work for them. They call their names. And so the people my daddy worked for, they called us and carried us over there by the Catholic Church over there. They had a big house and we stayed in the basement until the Red Cross somebody put tents out here and they built the tents, a great big room, you know, and a stick up in the middle of it, the whole tent up, and they just had it halfway, you know. Wood, they built the floor and everything halfway, and that was a tent.
So you lived in that tent through the winter then, did you?
I don't we lived in that tent until they finally came back after they got things quiet, you know, months after, and made the clothes, made a house, you know, put a top on.
Well, thank you so much. This has been very helpful. A child's eye view of the riot and the danger you felt and the protection of your
Come on in.
Okay. All right, we're through. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think I've been?
Oh, this was good. This was good.
Yeah, that's
We're going to talk.
Almost.
We're at the Rest Haven Nursing Home in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is the home of Mrs. Augusta Mann, who was married to one of the famous Mann brothers, who were entrepreneurs in Tulsa in the 1920s, 1930s, all the way through the 70s and 80s. They were grocers. They had grocery stores, and they figured prominently in the Tulsa community, and they also played a role, some of them played a role in the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921. Mrs. Mann will not be interviewed today, but she was interviewed by me in 1994, late 1994. And this is what she told me about the race riot. She said the Mann brothers were all Tulsa businessmen and were active in the grocery business from 1919 through the 1970s. My brother-in-law, J.D., opened the first store in 1919, but it was destroyed 2 years later in the awful Tulsa race riot. But he opened just 3 weeks after the riot. My husband, M.M., and his brother, Obie, opened the second grocery store in 1924. It was the largest grocery store in Tulsa, black or white at the time. It had 5 butchers. And she mentioned how they cared about the community, how they cared about the children. Even though her husband was a prominent Tulsa grocer, she said he would stop everything when the little neighborhood children came into the store. They played ball nearby. They would come in all hot and tired, and they would say, "Mr. Mann, we want some water." And she said no matter how busy he was, he would always stop whatever he was doing and give those children all the water they could drink and anything else they wanted. He would always say, "Y'all come on in." And he would give them water and little treats. And she mentioned the race riot. Here's what Mrs. Mann said about the race riot. The races hadn't learned to live together in peace then. Bad relations led to that riot in 1921. The night that the riot broke out, my husband and his brother were working in the store. When they heard about the riot, they quickly closed up and went home. Their mother begged them not to go back down on Greenwood. My husband listened to her, but his brother did not. He joined some other angry young black men who armed themselves and went down to fight the white mobs. Because of that action, my brother-in-law had to flee Tulsa when the riot was over. He was gone for 3 years, and his family didn't know whether he was living or dead. My poor mother-in-law grieved so while he was gone. When he returned, she and the entire family were just overjoyed. There were so many casualties from that riot. Not only the dead and wounded, but the survivors suffered too. Our store was far enough from the riot that it wasn't damaged, but the brother who had his store on Greenwood was burned out. Sometimes the white mob didn't know where the black living area ended and where the white living began, so some black property survived because whites thought it was black property. And she told me about the Mann brothers arming themselves, and that is documented in the book of Scott Ellsworth, Dr. Ellsworth, and others who write about the race riot. Some of those black men on Greenwood at that time, 1921, had served in World War I. They had served in France, where they had been treated with respect and dignity. They had come back with wearing their uniforms. They had their weapons. They had pride. And that figured in the Tulsa race riot. And that is why they armed themselves and walked down to the area or got in cars and loaded down the cars so with their guns sticking out. They went down to protect Dick Rowland from a lynching. And in fact, some books say, some sources say that the riot was started when a white man tried to take a gun away from one of the Mann brothers. And when he resisted, the shot was fired and the riot was on. So this was an eyewitness account that Mrs. Mann gave us 5 years ago about her famous husband and his brothers, the Mann brothers, and their role in history and what the riot did to them and to other North Tulsans. Thank you for letting us come and talk to you today. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yes, I got to see you again. Yes, I got to see you again. Yes, thank you so much. Well, tell me when
I'm ready, I'm rolling.
Okay. Today we're interviewing Mr. George Monroe, who he's been called on many times to give his eyewitness accounts of the riot, which happened when he was 5 years old. I've interviewed many people. I've located 58 living survivors of the Tulsa race riot, ages 78 to 106. And some of the older ones remember vividly, but also some of the younger ones, like Mr. Monroe, who was only 5. But when you go through something as traumatic as a riot, when you witness seeing mobsters burn your house down and you're hiding in the house, that's something you don't forget. So he has been one of our favorite subjects to interview. He's been on the Today Show. He's been on the featured on New York Times, Washington Post, Denver paper, in documentaries, film documentaries, and he continues to come and share these events with us because it's so important to hear history as it was observed by those who made history. I do it from the historical point of view from the book, but he can tell what it was like to be a child survivor. So Mr. Monroe, would you just tell us what it was like that night when Tulsa was set on fire and when you and your family were hiding, and what that riot did to you, and what it did to your dad, the losses, and how that affected your dad the rest of his life?
In speaking of the race riot, I must always start by saying to the people that are listening is that at the race riot I was 5 years old. A child 5 years old, think as a child 5 years old. I've been asked a lot of questions that I couldn't answer, that a grown person could answer. I always try to be careful is to tell exactly what I remember. And I let the rest of the questions, I leave them to put aside. What I remember most of everything was during the race riot, my little neighbor, Arvella Johnson, now deceased, and I were walking and running down the street holding hand in hand. I don't know as to exactly whether at what time of the riot this was, but I do remember the two of us running in front of our houses, which we lived next door to each other, hand in hand. But what I remember mostly is when all of a sudden my mother was excited, is because that she saw 4 men coming toward our house, and all of them had torches, lighted torches on their side, coming straight to our house. My 2 sisters and my brother, all of us were in the house, and she told us to get up under the bed quickly. So as a result, we got up under the bed, and I was the last one to get under the bed because my old sister had to pull me under the bed, being 5 years old. And when these people came in, these 4 men came in, they walked right past the bed, right straight to the curtains in the house. And they set fire to the curtains. And as a result, everything in and around was burning. And that's what I remember more than anything else. And that eventually, they left after then, and eventually this fire caused our house to burn down completely to the ground.
Didn't one of them officers step on your finger?
Yes, and my sister had to pull me back under the bed is because that in leaving, it's always been a thing, it's whether it was they were leaving or whether they were coming back. I've thought about this a lot of times. Were they coming in or were they going back out when they stepped on my finger? And so I just couldn't remember at 5 years old, but I know they did step on my finger, and my sister put her hand over my mouth to keep me from hollering. Now that's my story that I remember of the race riot. And as a result, our house was burnt down by the men, with four men with torches.
I've understood that your daddy owned a skating rink. He was quite a prominent person. He had a skating rink that he was very proud of, and that burned to the ground. And what about after it? He never could build that again.
My dad worked as a, people call it custodian today. He worked as a janitor at the Strand Theater between 1st and 2nd on Main Street. The people that owned the theater were ladies, 2 ladies. One was Mrs. McCoy that owned the theater, and my dad was a janitor there at the theater. Now, after the race riot, Mr. Wynn, the owner of a lumber yard that was near the tracks on Elgin Street, let my father have enough lumber to rebuild some houses, because there's one thing my dad always did: pay his bills. That's one with his 4 children. He did always pay his bills. And Mr. Wynn let him have enough lumber to build houses after the race ride. But to the skating rink, we had a skating rink on Exeter Street. Exeter was the name of the street, which is now Haskell Street. But on Exeter Street, we owned a big skating rink there as to where he made his money to support his family. And this, as a result, was burned down during the riot also, our home and our business.
And he never was able to rebuild the skating rink.
Later, he did rebuild, but that's after paying, had a hard time, is because he had to pay for the lumber that Mr. Wynn let him have to build these little shacks. So the money that he made, he paid his bill, still paid his bill, that Wynn Lumber Company.
How do you feel about this Riot Commission, us studying this? Do you think we're going to find what we're looking for? And do you hope that someday the city or the state or the nation might reimburse you for those losses your daddy incurred? How do you feel about that?
I have grown up in Tulsa, having been born here, and have lived in Tulsa, the only staple address that I've ever had, excluding the Army and things that took me away from home. But this is the only address that I've had in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And all in all, cut. Mine started wondering.
Thank you. It happens.
Yeah, well, hope you can cut
Oh,
that
yeah,
down.
that'd be
Yeah,
fine.
Waiting time to edit.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about reparation. How do you feel? Should somebody pay for your daddy's losses?
You see, you ask me questions that I never have even thought of, you know what I mean? And while I'm thinking, trying to answer your questions and everything else, I mean, my mind is going on
Okay.
one, I'll tell you, this 80-some years has eaten me alive. It is. I'm not used to being.
Well,
I thought at one time I was pretty sharp. I thought that. Found out that.
well, let me just tell you how some people feel about it. There are some people who feel that the black people in Tulsa, the Greenwood area that was destroyed from Archer to Pine, 35 blocks, totally wiped out, that property would have been worth 13 to 15 million dollars at that time. Burned up, wiped out. People had insurance, they filed claims, no insurance claims were ever paid. Today that property would be valued at over $100 million. Now, it's not likely that somebody, the local government, state government, national, is going to say, okay, we're going to pay that to the offspring. But do you think some kind of recognition should be made? Should somebody acknowledge this happened, it wasn't right, nobody's ever paid? Would you like something like that? Or if there is some money set aside called reparations, would you think it was justified for people like you and your daddy who lost all that property?
The race ride happened when I was 5 years old. I've always lived right across the street from Booker T. Washington High School, just directly. We moved in 2 places, our rental place where the skating rink was and our home, which was right around the corner. All my life I've lived across the street from the school. I could wake up at 8:29 and I could make it somehow or another by 30, because all I had to do was go across the street and I'd be right in my class. Being 5 years old and growing up in Tulsa, and my father working downtown at the Strand Theater, I've had my own little thoughts about my hometown, and which I still do. Some people are interested in my thoughts about Tulsa, Oklahoma, and some people condemn my thoughts about Tulsa, Oklahoma. But I know Tulsa, Oklahoma. People ask me, George, why do you think the race riot happened? I have one answer for that. The black section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is north, was a little bit too close to downtown Tulsa. And it's still that way today. You can sit here or at my house, which isn't too far, and you can look downtown and see every building that they are building. Anytime they build one, you can look and you can see the city growing. And you come right across the tracks and you see nothing but black businesses, black homes. And I've always thought that this was one of the things why that race riot was. It's to move us out and get us away from this downtown. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, on the north side is just as flat as it can be, and on the south side of town, everything is up and over and hills and everything. You can't see downtown Tulsa from the far other side of town. You can't even see downtown Tulsa. That's my personal opinion, and I could be wrong about that. But having been born in Tulsa and living here all my life, that's my personal.
So I take it you probably don't think we're going to get any reparations or any money paid to North Tulsa.
It would be a blessing if we would, but knowing Tulsa, Oklahoma,
I think
somebody's got a hard job.
I think I know what you're saying. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and it really does mean a lot to hear from you who live the history. And I thank you for sharing that with us. You've been so gracious to come out when we call and take you away from the building on your Pink Lady, Pink Lounge. Pink House. It's Pink House. And he is really hard at work on that. And I think they're going to come out and do a story on your little Pink House. And I wish you well with that endeavor. And I thank you for coming out to share with us whenever we need somebody to talk about the race riot of 1921. Thank you. All right, perfect. Want to do that?
If you want that little sweat.
Oh.
Your tether here.
Oh, okay, okay.
Well, thanks for doing that.
You don't care?
Hey, how's it going on, girl?
Taking in my facts.
No, I was trying to see if I can get a good shot at that picture that John Ho Franklin sent. You and I have a Xerox copy of it.
Why did you talk to me when you had a friend? You would not they would have.
All this stuff, but you may never, might be another fire.
That's true. Get them.
All right, let me know what you're going to do about that play.
Oh, okay. You know what?
Well, you can, if you want to tell me a little thing off while you're kind of getting your thoughts together. Okay, let's just start. Today we're interviewing Mrs. Eldoris May Ector McCondichie. Did I pronounce that right? Okay, and she was 9 years old during the ride, and we just want to hear your child's point of view. What do you remember? What happened? How did it affect you and your brother? And what about the losses? And and you had an interesting story to tell about your church, how it was not burned, and how you all saw that as an act of God.
Yeah.
So just tell us what it was like to be 9 years old and caught in a race ride.
At 9 years old, it was most disturbing because I was asleep, and my mother awakened me, and she told me to get up, and so she could dress me. And naturally, a child that age who wanted to just sleep and not hear and don't hear, well, I didn't answer at first, but this is the phrase she used when she really got up. She says, Doris, get up so I can get you dressed. The white folks are killing the colored folks.
Oh.
And I thought, when she said that, I jumped up and I thought that we were just being lined up and ambushed like that. But anyway, in looking out the door, I could see nothing but black rolling smoke from the south, and people on the Midland Valley Railroad all across, about 5 or 6 breaths across the road, going north. And when we left our house, I was so afraid because bullets were coming down around us. The planes were up in the air, shooting down, and I could hear those bullets falling. And all of a sudden, when we got to the track, I went over the track, and there were a lot of people running, dodging the bullets, and just afraid. So I ran into they ran into a chicken coop. At that time of year, way back then, people had chickens and had chicken coops, and so this was an empty one, I guess. But people just filled it up. I ran in with them and got in the corner, and just afraid to death. My father had to come in and get me, and I really pulled back, didn't want to go, because I just didn't know what to do. So anyway, we went on down the track with the rest of the people. I don't know where we stopped, but we stopped in one little country town, and the people were so nice to us. White people. They had an empty house, and he said to them, you could just stay in this house tonight, and they did give us food. And the next morning, someone talked with my mother and says, if you can go to Pahasca. Said, I have some friends there, and I'm sure they will give you a place to live. So we did go to Pahasca, and we stayed the rest of the week, and the people were nice to us. By the name of Johnsons, I just can't, relate everything. But anyway, we stayed there the rest of the week, and then after it was all clear here. Well, we came back home on the Midland Valley train, and we passed our house going, because we lived right on Iroquois, right there in the 1400 block, and we passed our house going to the station to come back. And after that, the National Guard was here to keep the peace or to protect the Negroes, and I was afraid. I went up to the Man Brothers store that was on the corner of Oklahoma and Lansing. And there I met, as I turned the corner, there was the National Guard, a huge man just walking, and I was afraid. I said, oh. And then I realized that he was there to protect us. So I wasn't afraid anymore. And burning down the churches. Every church, our schoolhouses, was blown up. We had a 2-story red bricks house there on Eastern and Hartford. And it was the Dunbar School. And I didn't know anything about Booker T. Washington, but it was over there. And all of the churches in Dunbar School just blown to bits. All of the businesses. They were just really after the business part of which was Greenwood. And the homes on Detroit were teachers and doctors' homes. So this is what happened. But our church was a Holderness Church, Church of God in Christ, little white frame building, setting up off of Greenwood on Independence. And they set that church afire, I was told, and we could see where it was burned. I don't know how many times, but each time they would set it afire, and they used coal oil in those days. And then somebody said they got tired and that wouldn't burn. The blaze would go up and come down. And in using coal oil, they decided we would use gasoline. They used gasoline, put on, lighted it. The blaze would go up and come down. It just seared about that much space of the church from the bottom to the, to the, up, not the ceiling, just up the wall. And so I knew that was God keeping us, and he knew how hard the people worked in those days to keep the church. And there was a lot of prayer then. And he saved that church. And that was really amazing with all of the other things being just blown apart. And all of the churches, the little churches out north here beyond me, well, they didn't bother too much. The far north, from Iroquois, well, from Marshall on out, because they were all small houses, some nice houses. And the churches, they weren't interested in that. Mostly, they were interested in destroying the business. So, that's about it.
Well, thank you. That was so helpful. So very, very helpful.
Excuse me. Can I move a minute?
Oh, thank you. Well, you were young. I guess the adults.
We had curfew, though.
Oh, you did have curfew.
We had a certain time, to be off the street. I remember that we didn't, if they had cards, I don't know my parents.
Yeah, the parents probably. And so your house was not burned then? You said you saw it when you were coming in? You saw it standing?
It was still there.
How did you feel seeing your house stand?
Well, I felt fine because, well, we didn't have much. A little bit we have, it was saved. So I felt all right about that.
I've interviewed lots of children who said they were playing when it happened, and just like you wanted to sleep. You didn't realize the significance of what was like you were in a war, and you just couldn't understand that.
Well, at that time, I don't know why I was staying all night with my auntie and her 2 daughters. They were on the corner of Pine and Iroquois, and I did go down there to go to bed, and there's something at that age just wouldn't let me stay. And I said to her that, I says, I'm going home and I'll be back in a few minutes. I went home and lay down and went to sleep. And this is what I was
God
with
was
my mother
protecting you, putting you with your
calling
family.
me. So
that's
the way it was.
That is so sweet. Well, I do thank you. That was very helpful.
Well, I hope so.
It was, and you're so articulate. I think I'm put 60 Minutes is coming to do a show nationwide, and they said we'll take your suggestions. Would you mind being? You're so articulate, so poised. You are. You're just beautiful. It just shows. You'd be great for it. I'd love to have you. What do you think about it? They'll be here in June.
Okay.
First week in June, and they told me to pick the ones I thought would be best, and you're one of them.
Thank you.
Okay.
I didn't think it was so much.
Oh, I did. Yeah, it was good.
Thank you.
Now, who's those people there in the picture there?
Oh, well, let's get that.
Okay.
These are, tell me their names.
Warren, John and Harriet Warren.
Warren,
Warren, W-R-R-E.
Texas. What part of Texas did these come?
Their home was in Tyler, the
Tyler.
farm
Oh,
home.
yes.
In Tyler,
Uh-huh.
years ago before I was born.
Uh-huh.
Then we all moved, whenever they would move
Uh-huh.
in those days, the whole
Oh.
family would move.
So-
So they came to Dallas.
Now, who was this?
This is my grandmother.
Oh, this is her on one by herself.
Yeah, just hold it straight
Okay.
up and down.
And they came out of Tyler, Texas.
Tyler to Dallas.
Uh-huh.
And we lived in Dallas. That's the one that I really remember where we lived in Dallas.
Oh, uh-huh.
And then when they moved to Tulsa,
just
my family,
Like that. Just
all
hold
of
it
the
like that.
family came to Tulsa.
Oh.
Mhm.
Well, this is typical of the Tulsans that I interviewed, those who came, or those who were in the riot. They mostly came seeking a better way of life.
Mhm.
And Tulsa was booming, oil and industry and banking and furniture and everything.
Long time.
Uh-huh. Well, that's real
And
sweet.
what church was that?
Church of God in Christ, Holderness. It was on Independence, and it was Greenwood, off of Greenwood, up on Independence. And at that time, Independence was a hill. It went up, kind of on the hill. We were sitting down on the
Where
side.
Pioneer Plaza is?
No. Greenwood.
Okay.
And you can't hardly tell where Independence was, but it came in off of Greenwood.
Okay.
Let me see. I
By
said,
King?
how old are you?
Oh,
By King.
I'm 65.
You're so young.
Oh,
I'm
so he's
65.
30, what, 37?
I'll be 37 next month.
My baby is 36, and so I'm anxious
Well,
to them.
you're so young. No, Independence, let's see. King, Jasper, and then Independence
Oh,
was
okay,
next.
okay.
And Independence was kind of up a rugged hill, like the brickyard used to be
Oh,
right.
right behind
Okay.
the church.
got it.
Some apartments or the Greenwood or Greenwich Village. Some white apartments I remember long ago. But it was right in that brickyard area.
Yeah, the brickyard was right in the back of where the church was, those lots. And one of our school teachers lived up the hill from that, it was named